welcome to St Mary's Church in Alne in North Yorkshire. We're here to have a look at the Norman Romanesque Doorway behind me here, which is full of imagery from the Anglo Saxon Bestiary. Bestiaries were collections of animals, both real, naturalistic, as well as imagined mythical creatures, full of allegorical meaning, often linking to biblical lessons. So we're going to be having a look at the door, trying to interpret the meaning, and then we'll have a quick look inside as well, where there's a few additional interesting features. My name is Chris, this is Church Searcher, and I'll see you after the map. So in the Domesday Book, the land around Alne is listed as belonging to the Archbishop of York, and the land is actually listed as being waste. There's no mention of there being a church or a priest here, so it's likely that perhaps any existing church that was here from the Anglo Saxon period was destroyed in the harrying of the north by William the Conqueror. There are, however, traces of an Anglo-Saxon building here. There's a big lintel above the priest's door which has pre-conquest carvings upon it. You can see behind me the church has gone through many phases of building, pretty much every century since it was first built in the 1100s. It went through a big rebuilding phase in around 1150, and the north aisle was added on in the 13th century, and bits and bobs have been added on over the years. You can see where they've extended the tower on top there as well. Now, due to the fact that it was the Archbishop of York who owned the land around here, it was probably masons from York who were involved in building this, and they very possibly had access to a copy of a bestiary from the Minster Library, which still actually exists in York. Now, the only bestiary in the English language which survives to this day is called the Exeter Book, and so it's possible that the masons here had access to a copy of that in York Minster Library and use that for the depictions of the animals which we'll see around the doorway here. So this is the doorway here, and you can see it's not in a great state of preservation, but there's two orders of carvings. There's these inner medallions, sandstone, quite heavily eroded there, they're original. These white blocks are also original, they've been painted to help preserve them, but those upper ones, the brown coloured, more recent replacements. Now, the inner course contains various carvings of signs of the zodiac, labours of the month, ploughing, sowing, harvesting, things like that, but it's the outer course which contains these allegorical depictions from the bestiary, and that's what we're interested in. Now, inner course, you can see there's an Agnus Dei, Lamb of God, and at the top we can see there's actually perhaps two stars, the celestial bodies in the heavens right at the top, possibly even the star that the wise men followed for the Nativity. So in a way, this inner track is there for like a timeline of the year, following the constellations that are visible in the sky, or the various agricultural cycles of the year. So here with my handy stick, see if we can interpret some of these panels. We've got Lupis here on the left, the fox, and you can just make out the fox laying on its back, feet in the air. Its mouth is open at this end, facing up, and its tail is extending off down to the left. And there's a bird, two birds. There's one that's sat on its chest, its beak looking down, another one to the right here. Its beak is actually pointing into the fox's mouth. So in the allegorical bestiaries, the fox is described as laying in wait for its prey by simulating death. It would lie on its back, cover its white belly with dirt, hang with its mouth open, arms in the air, pretending to be dead, waiting for carrion crows to come along. And so here the birds have come right up, they're gazing right into its mouth, they think they've got some easy pickings for dinner, and that's when the fox strikes. So this is an allegory for the devil lying in wait, setting traps for humans in the form of the birds here, and so you've got to be aware, look out for the traps and tricks of the devil. Next along we've got Pantera, a panther. Looking to the left here you can see its open mouth, tail on the right, and there's a little creature facing it, gazing at the panther's face, which has little wings, and that's interpreted to be a dragon. Now again, in the bestiaries and the allegories in the Exeter book, panther is an allegory for Christ, and when it opened its mouth to recite beautiful poetry, all the animals would come around and listen, mesmerised by what it had to say, except for the dragon, who would flee away in terror and eventually go off and die. So in this allegory, the panther is obviously Christ, drawing people in with his teachings and words, except for the devil, who flees off and is defeated. But here we can see that the devil's clearly quite mesmerised by what the panther has to say. Perhaps it's about to flee off and die, off screen as it were. Now, as part of this mythological allegory as well, the panther would go and sleep in its cave for 3 days and then rise again and come up about. And the parallels there obviously with Jesus rising from the tomb after his death are clear. So next along we've got Aquila, the eagle, the king of all birds. Now in the bestiaries and the stories, the eagle was said to be able to fly right up into the sky towards the hot sun and stare right into the blinding sun, pretty much like what I'm doing on this winter's day today with the low sun right in my eyes. But it was able to withstand that bright sun, and in fact it would fly back down and grab birds out of nests and lead them back up in its talons to also gaze into the light. And if those young birds flinched in the gaze of the sun, it knew that those birds weren't its own. But if those young birds didn't flinch, the eagle would know that those were its own young, and it would obviously help save them. It was also said as the eagles got older, they would fly up towards the sun, scorch their wings, and then come down and cool the wings in a mythical fountain, which would then regenerate them. So again, the eagle is an allegory for Christ. The myth of the bird being able to regenerate its feathers in a fountain is an allegory for baptism and the forgiveness of sins and the resurrection of life after death. Now next along we've got the hyena. There's this foliage coming out of its mouth. It's always looked to me like that is sort of breath or fire, but it's interpreted to be foliage. Now hyenas were thought of as being the worst of all animals, despicable, dirty, living in caves, feeding on the corpses of dead humans, but also with the ability to lure shepherds out at night with their laughter and ability to mimic human voices, only to pounce on them and devour them. So again, this is an allegory for the opposite. This is an allegory for the devil, who hides in the dark, a despicable person who leads people to sin, tempts them out through deceit and wickedness, and really is someone that we don't want to meet or become. So next along, you can see there's this bird, Caladrius. This was a white bird, pure white, about the size of a thrush, which lived around Jerusalem apparently. And this had the ability to predict whether someone was going to live or die on their deathbed. If you were going to die, it would fly down and look away from you, but if you were going to live, it would face you. It also had the ability to draw out sickness, upon which it would fly up towards the sun, the sickness would evaporate, and the person would be healed. So in this instance, we can see the Caladrius is actually sat on the chest of the person. It's gazing at them, their face is on the left there, and they're laying down with a stool supporting their head, signifying that they're going to be alright, they're healed. So again, the Caladrius is an allegory for Jesus. He turned away from the Jews who rejected him, turned towards the Gentiles who did accept him, and his healing power and ability to take away our sins as he ascended into heaven is similar to what the Caladrius does with taking illness up towards the sun. Now apparently there was no inscription with this next carving, so it's unclear as to what the allegory is, but it's clearly a goat eating some sort of foliage there on the left, its tail on the right, you can see its horn, perhaps even a suggestion of a little goatee beard on its chin. Across on the other side, again no inscription on this one, so that the interpretation is a bit unclear, but clearly a dragon. You see its curly tail on the right, mouth on the left, a pair of wings, perhaps an allegory for the devil there. But next along is perhaps the most interesting for me. It's called Terobolem, and it depicts two figures. You can see them here, their hands over their chests and another hand upraised, and there's fire emitting all over the place behind them. Now Terobolem were a pair of mythical stones that existed on a mountain in the Far East that were said to take the form of a man and a woman. But if they were brought together, they would gradually heat up very, very quickly until they would burst into flames and continue burning and getting hotter until the whole mountain was destroyed. Now, if we cast our minds into the patriarchal Norman mindset, this is an allegory for the sins of the flesh, the dangers of giving into lust. Now, interestingly for me, up here in the north of England, we were very much under the sway of Celtic Christianity, which was a much more equal society, up until 664 AD, the Synod of Whitby, where we made the switch to Roman Gregorian traditions, which were coming up with the missionaries sent from Rome from the south of England. So subsequent to that, we switched to the Roman traditions up here in the north, which was much more inspired by Mediterranean patriarchal society, replacing the Celtic church, which itself was influenced by Celtic society. It's not far from here we have Whitby Abbey, which was a double house, meaning it had nuns and monks living together. In the opposite direction we've got Hiena Abbey under St Hugh. She was the predecessor to St Hilda at Hartlepool Abbey, another dual house. Hiena was also a dual monastery. In fact, you had church leaders like St Hugh and St Hilda who were women, and all that went away after the Gregorian Roman reforms, when they were very much more strictly separated. So this is kind of an interesting marker for the change in society and Christianity all around this area and the country in general. Now, the final legible panel is this one with a boat. You can see there's a mast and there's a person on either side of it, and there's some wavy seas underneath. There was once a Latin inscription that went over the top which read Aspido, which is short for whale. Now, the whale has obviously been omitted, presumably it's down below the waves here, but this is another reference to the bestiaries. The whale was said to dive down to the bottom of the ocean, grab a load of sand, come back up to the surface, and then use the sand to disguise itself as an island, tempting sailors to come along and land on it, at which point it would sink below the surface, drowning those people who would come ashore onto the supposed island. So in this allegory then, the whale was clearly the devil, similar to the fox on the other side, lying in wait with the temptation of riches personified in the sand on the island. The sea in the allegory is meant to be the world, and the boat itself here is meant to be the human body, steered by the soul, so the tillerman at the back there. So, a fascinating door full of possibilities for interpretation, giving us an insight into the medieval mind here at St Mary's Church in Alne. It's equally fascinating inside. There's loads more of those corbels which originally would have been outside, now on the inside wall. There's a 12th century font. There's also an effigy of a member of the Allegorical family who lived in a nearby house, with angels holding a little pillow ready to catch her soul. There's also a very rare funerary garland in there, which I won't film, just to help preserve it from the light. So if you want to see that, you'll have to come here yourself. So until next time, I'll see you in the next video, and keep church searching.